In today's episode, we open our Bibles to Judges chapter 5. Judges 5 is a poetic retelling of the events of the previous chapter, where God used Deborah and Barak and Jael to defeat the Canaanite army led by Sisera. The song praises God for his intervention. It celebrates the courage and willingness of the Israelites who fought and contrasts the fate of Sisera and his mother with the peace and joy of Israel. Good morning and blessed Holy Monday to you. Today is Monday, April 3rd, and you're listening to Thy Strong Word. This is the program where each weekday morning we explore the Holy Scriptures to which God bespeaks us righteous and nourishes our faith. I'm your host, Pastor Phil Booe of St. John Lutheran Church in Laverne, Minnesota. I'm grateful for the support of the Lutheran Heritage Foundation, a ministry that provides Lutheran resources in various languages around the world. You can learn more about their work and how to get involved at lhfmissions.org. Well, we're starting off our Holy Week with a dive into Judges chapter 5. And joining me this early Holy Monday, it's early for me anyway, is my guest, the Reverend Rick Jones, chaplain and vice president of spiritual life for the Dakota Boys and Girls Ranch in Minot, North Dakota. Pastor Jones, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Pastor Boo. Always enjoy digging into the Word, so this will be great.
Great. Well, I'm happy to have you here. You know, I say it's early for me. It's 11 o'clock, of course. That's pretty late for most people, and usually for me too. But Mondays, I usually like to take it easy. But during Holy Week, there really is no taking it easy. There's so much to do. But I'm happy to be starting off my Holy Week with you on the air. Full disclosure, we've had this discussion before, but there were some problems. So now we're live today. We're going to redo our discussion. But you know what? I think that's great because this is such a fascinating text. But I only mention it because I just wanted to tell you how grateful I am for you agreeing to come back on the air and discuss Judges 5 with me again.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. Things happen. Hopefully we can be as entertaining and insightful as we were the first time.
Oh, yeah, they'll never know. It was amazing. We had so many great insights, and it was we'll see if we can capture it in the bottle this time. Well, I tell you what, I will ask, though, you know, I know that you were up there at the Dakota Boys and Girls Ranch. How are things there during the Lenten season? I mean, it must be a little different than maybe church life. Does it affect what you guys do at all?
Sure. We try to build some series into the Lenten season. I like to do a focus on superheroes. I know that sounds weird, but I look at it as our prayer during the Lenten season is, Lord, I need a hero. You know, we focus on our inability to save ourselves, our inability to find that redemption, and the stories that we tell in our world, whether it's through comic books or literature or movies or TV or even music, they all are touching on these themes of needing a hero, whether that's from the monster inside of us, right, that sinful nature, or justice in an unjust world, or redemption for our past failures or mistakes, or just someone to save us, to rescue us from this broken reality. It all points ultimately to the real hero, and that is Christ, and that's who we're waiting for in the Lenten season. We go through the 40 days in the wilderness, waiting for the hero to make the scene, and that's what we got to celebrate yesterday. And so I build that into the chapel messages and services, and we do some fun things like that. And then we always try to do a special Easter Sunday service, which is Sunday is an unusual day for us to have service. We usually do it Thursday afternoons, but Easter Sunday, we get one of the praise bands from one of the local congregations here in Minot to come and give us a fantastic victory celebration as we celebrate the resurrection on Easter. And we've got similar celebrations at the other campuses as well. They've been focusing on some different aspects of our relationships with God in both Bismarck and Fargo. So we have the celebrations, we have the special seasonal things, and we really try to help our residents see the connection to these needs are universal, and we have a Savior that is for all of us as well.
Oh, what an amazing message, and something that something we need to hear all year long. But Holy Week and the toward the end of Lentintide is just it's such a great opportunity for us to renew our connection to what Christ has done for us and how He's come and saved us from our sins and rescued us from the evils of the world. And I know that you deal with a lot of folks who are looking for a hero, and they can find
Right.
that the true hero in Jesus, and I think that's just amazing.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, would you begin our time together with prayer before we dig right into the text?
I would be happy to. Heavenly Father, as we dig into your word today, we ask that you would make it come alive in our hearts. Open us to receive your instruction, to receive your love and grace as you impart it to us through the wisdom of your holy word. Bless us and use this time to guide us to grow more into the people you have called us to be. This we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Well, all right. So we're looking at our text today. This is chapter 5, and I think we're going to find that chapter 5 is a whole lot like chapter 4 because
Yeah.
it tells the same story, doesn't it? But it does it in a way that's, I guess, a little different than what we've heard so far. Give us a little bit of background about what we're going to be getting into.
Right. So Judges chapter 5 is the sort of poetic retelling of the events of Judges chapter 4. It's even done as a song. It's a song of Deborah and Barak, and they're singing about the victory that God has given them over the Canaanites. The Canaanites were the oppressors, the villains at this point in Israel's history. Somewhere around 1200 BC, although some people get very specific and say, oh, it was 1217. It was around 1200 BC. And they were given an incredible, unfathomable victory over this huge Canaanite army with just these Israelites that had been being oppressed. And so what they're doing is they are recounting that in song. They are inspired by the events to try to share this with future generations. And one of the ways you do this is to put it in song. It's actually a trope in fantasy literature, films, and movies to inspire people to action by assuring them that their actions are those that will be sung about for generations to come. And here in Judges chapter 5, we have a real life example of that. And if you look at the sort of Hebrew of it, and you talk to some of the scholars and you read some of the commentaries, it's very clear that this very likely is the case, that this chapter had been handed down for generations before the rest of the book of Judges is compiled to tell the history of God's people. Its word choices and its grammatical constructions seem very ancient and archaic, even compared to other sections of poetry in the Old Testament. It also has a lot of rhetorical devices, such as alliteration. It has rhyme scheme and meter, and in some places, onomatopoeia. So the words sound like what they're describing. And all of these things would help make this a catchy piece of literature. It would help people remember it, and so it can be passed on down through the generations. Now, we don't see that as much in the English as you would if you're reading the ancient Hebrew, but there are a few places where even in the translations into English, it comes out. We see repeated words, we see repeated phrases, we get sort of sounds that and words that really convey the action here in a with sort of mnemonic devices and things. And so it really speaks to what it is. It is a joyful, celebratory retelling of what God has done for them. He has given them an unthinkable victory in this time. And we have it set down in music so that all generations can continue to hear of God's saving work for the Israelites under Deborah and Barak.
The chapter begins with the first verse saying, "Then sang Deborah and Barak, the son of Abinoam, on that day." So
Yes.
it presents it as, the victory has been won, and they burst out
Yeah.
into song like a Disney musical. Of course, we're going to read the words here, and it might be a little bit more graphic than a Disney musical. But is that what is really going on? I mean, it does make sense that you're going to take the events, you're going to set them to music so that you can pass them down through the generations. And it's also what you've said, at least what I've heard, is it's kind of neat that really the song is older than the previous chapter where it's related. In fact, in very many ways, that relation probably comes from the song. But
Yeah.
are they breaking out into song? I mean, again, passing it down is one thing, but to sing these songs, it seems kind of I don't know. It is almost like a trope. It's hard to get my mind around it. But there are other
Yeah.
places in the Bible where this occurs too.
Right. We have other instances of songs being used to recount God's deeds, the mighty works of the Lord, so the people remember. I don't know that they had dance steps and things, and I don't know that it's like a flash mob type situation. But, to have people sing praises isn't unusual. I don't know if they, if this is a spontaneous, right away in the moment, breaking out into song and everybody adds to the verses or things like that. But certainly commemorating these things in songs is a regular sort of occurrence. We have that happen previous in the Old Testament with Moses and Miriam, excuse me, after God delivers them from the hands of the Egyptians. And so here we have other sort of echoes of Exodus in this text as well that we'll see later on with the way a river and the waters are sort of working. But here, God is using this to bring victory again to his people, and they want to commemorate that. They want to celebrate that. And here it's under the leadership of Deborah as a prophetess, and the general Barak as they're fighting against Jael is the general for the Canaanite army, Jael is the woman that's going to end up bringing victory to the people over Sisera. Misspeaking there. Who's the general for the Canaanite army? Different situation, but still something that's incredible and unthinkable. And so they need to carry it on in celebration. Singing praise to God is how we do that.
Well, let's read verses 1, which I just read, but verses 1 all the way through 9, and it's starting to set the stage for, I guess, a precursor to the actual events of chapter 4. So here we go, starting with the very first verse of chapter 5. Then sang Deborah and Barak, the son of Abinoam, on that day, that the leaders took the lead in Israel, that the people offered themselves willingly, bless Yahweh. Hear, O kings, give ear, O princes. To Yahweh I will sing. I will make melody to Yahweh, the God of Israel. Yahweh, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the region of Edom, the earth trembled, the heavens dropped. Yes, the clouds dropped water. The mountains quaked before Yahweh, even Sinai before Yahweh, the God of Israel. In the days of Shamgar, son of Anath, in the days of Jael, the highways were abandoned and travelers kept to the byways. The villagers ceased in Israel. They ceased to be until I arose. I, Deborah, arose as a mother in Israel. When new gods were chosen, then war was in the gates. Was shield or spear to be seen among 40,000 in Israel? My heart goes out to the commanders of Israel who offered themselves willingly among the people. Bless Yahweh. So clearly, Deborah is the one speaking in this instance, but she's setting the stage for, I guess, the condition of the nation, the condition of Israel before all of these events took place. It kind of sounds like an apocalyptic scene, a war zone. The villagers aren't there, the highways are abandoned, people are afraid. What scene are we being given here?
Yeah, so she is definitely establishing the context for which God's victory is going to be brought to the people. So under Jabin, the king of the Canaanites, there's been incredible oppression. There's all sorts of terrible things that are being done. People are afraid to travel. But before we even get to sort of the setting of the scene, we're told, again, the victory has already taken place, and so now we're going to sing this. They say, "Hear, O kings, give ear, O princes." The idea here, they're making the defeated Canaanites join in the celebration, as this is, about 200 years before Israel's going to have a king. That's the only explanation there. So they're adding embarrassment to the military loss by making them join in this. But it's one of those situations where even God's enemies have to acknowledge the demonstration of his power and might. Like we see the rulers in the book of Daniel, they declare the wonder and majesty of Yahweh after he has intervened for whether it's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or for Daniel. We see these sorts of things from time to time. But here they're making the defeated rulers engage with the celebration, acknowledge that victory came over them at the hands of Yahweh, the hands of the God of the people that they were trying to oppress. And then we get the introduction to what we're doing. Who's receiving praise in this song as Yahweh, the Lord, is introduced with grandiose style, having power over the elements. And we're going to see that demonstrated later on. The mention of these other places, Seir and Edom, they're callbacks to the patriarchs and the path of God's covenant being traced through the people that he blessed and what he is going to do with them. And he's going to continue to make that known here and now. Even the skies and mountains are trembling in his presence. And that's who's going to deliver them. Why does he need to deliver them? Because they are being oppressed so much. They're afraid to travel, right? They don't even want to have commerce intertribally or interregionally anymore because they're afraid to be on the roads of what's going to happen to them. The line about villages could indicate that there's no more fortified cities anymore. They've been so beaten down that they're just scraping by. They're weak. They're weary. They're fearful of how the Canaanites are treating them. They've been so overcome that they no longer have weapons or shields. It's everything they can do to feed themselves and keep themselves alive. And so they need help. They need someone to intervene for them. And so they cry out to God, and he gives them a deliverer. It's going to be Deborah in this case. She's called to be a prophetess and a judge. Got some other prophetesses in the Old Testament as well. Miriam, who also sings and has that role. Huldah, Neodia, and if that's how you pronounce it, Isaiah's wife is implied to have that title, but it's a little unclear whether or not that's as in an official capacity or as his wife. And then in the New Testament, we have Anna referenced as a prophetess. So we have these roles, and Deborah's going to fill that role here. But I think in this instance, maybe more importantly or more distinctly as the judge, the sort of social leader or maybe judicial leader. She's making the decisions for the people. And then they call up Barak as the general who's supposed to help. But what's also interesting here is we also see why the Israelites need a deliverer in this time. It says they were worshiping other gods. They had chosen new gods. They're worshiping the Canaanite idols. And this is the source of their oppression and their punishment. It got terrible because they were acting unfaithfully towards Yahweh. They were unfaithful to the one who had already delivered them for several generations. And so when the things get so bad, they cry out. They acknowledge that what they've done is wrong. They cry out for deliverance. They cry out for mercy, and God answers, right? It's how nearly every section of the book of Judges opened. And the people of Israel, again, did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Insert Canaanite army A, B, or C came in to oppress them. And then the people of Israel cried out to the Lord for help. In this case, it's, I think, in chapter 4, verses 1 through 3, it gives us that same formula. The leaders are then appointed as God hears their prayers, and it's not going to matter that there are no more weapons or defenses for Israel, because the Lord is going to accomplish his purposes no matter what. Those who trust in his power are still glad to fight on on behalf of him and his people, and we're going to see them listed here and given some honor. But he's going to do what he promises. He will always be the God that intervenes for his people. He is the one that's bringing the victory. He's the one that will bring them salvation. And it's going to happen through this military campaign. But ultimately, the final victory is going to be in a very unlikely way. It's through a scene of irony with very graphic depiction of its exercise. As we see Jael, this outsider, a wife of a Canaanite who lives in a tent, is going to deliver the fatal blow to Sisera, the enemy general.
Well, as we look at these just first few verses too, one of the things that stands out to me is how Deborah describes herself. So we've talked about in the previous chapter on Friday, we talked about this too, Deborah being in this role of prophetess. What does that really mean? What does it mean that she's a judge? She's also, I think, the only judge that actually does, or at least is described as doing kind of judging things, sitting under the tree of Deborah. Yeah. But here it says, I, Deborah, arose as a mother in Israel. Right. And what I love about this is in this day and age of, gender confusion, here we have a description of a strong leader, a woman, but she's appealing to the characteristics that make women so amazingly strong. And that is her idea of a motherhood. We don't know if she was actually a mother, but she was a mother to Israel. And so we think about the nurturing and caring for and directing the people that comes with that office of motherhood. It doesn't say, I, Deborah, had to arise and be a king in the place of, Barak, who was this coward, which is partly true. But she says, I arose as a mother. And so and maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I love how it really is elevating that she is operating in the sense that she's using the gifts God gave her as opposed to trying to be something she's not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree. She is fulfilling that role of nurture. She's fulfilling that role of caring for the people of Israel as they've been so worn down and so beaten into, desperation by what has been happening to them at the hands of the Canaanites, that they need the motherly, nurturing love to bring them back to a place where they can have that confidence in who they're supposed to be, where they can have the will to do what is right because they have all of their needs met. And so what also I think as that motherly role, she's kind of a mother to Barak too, right? He's the one that's supposed to be going out and leading the army. He's supposed to be going out and taking charge of this, but he's not willing to unless she goes with him. And so she's going to do it, and she's doing it to hold him accountable, right? That's something a mother does for her children, and a father too, but I think a mother has a way of doing it that's maybe a little gentler and gets the results that are needed. She's going to be there, but he's going to be the one that has to fulfill his role as the general. But then, and she says, though, but by the way, you're not going to get the big congratulations here. In her role as the prophetess, maybe she's given the understanding that a woman's going to receive the glory. And maybe she's thinking it's going to be her, and we're going to see that it's not. But it's not Barak, right? This is maybe a shameful thing, but he still does what he needs to do, right? He let the mother down, but he's still going to go and do his duty. And so I think maybe that's part of it too. But I think I'm with you there, that there's a clear sense that this is the type of leader they need. They need that motherly support, that motherly love to guide them to this next step.
Well, and I think she chastises him in a way that is acceptable because of her motherly role. For instance, when she tells him in the previous chapter, hey, listen, you want me to go with you? Well, okay, I'm going to go with you, but you're not going to get the glory. It's going to go to a woman. Had, say, a man said that would be fighting words. But coming from Deborah, it's like, oh, wow, it is to his great shame. And not because of male-female roles, but because of his leadership role. He should have been ready to lead for the Lord. Two more
Right.
verses I'm going to add because it really completes this initial thought, because it begins talking to these princes and kings. And now it says in verse 10, tell of it, you who ride on white donkeys, you who sit on rich
Yeah.
carpets, and you who walk by the sea. To the sound of musicians at the watering places, there they repeat the righteous triumphs of Yahweh, the righteous triumphs of his villagers in Israel. Then down to the gates march the people of Yahweh. And it continues. But in these verses, there's some sarcasm I sense here, right? Because it's to the princes and the kings, but they're not riding on war horses. They're sitting on these white donkeys and luxurious carpets. And meanwhile, they're being overrun by the outsiders. Their people are following after the gods of foreigners, and they're just, I guess, what, living their best life?
Right. I think there's kind of, we can take this a couple of ways. One, it could be sort of, you got to get the nobles and the elite behind the cause here. They should be on board with this immediately, but they're not. They have to be sort of, not coerced isn't quite right, but encouraged. Right? They have to be brought along, and so they have to go and get them to get people motivated, and you appeal to the elites and those that are, the wealthy to do that. The white donkeys and the carpets are definitely a sign of wealth and prestige here. So it could be that. It could also be that this is more of the embarrassment to the foreigners. Maybe this is an extension of those kings and princes that need to participate in this as a humiliation. Or it could be the getting the cultural influencers to pick up their role and get the people excited and motivated for this military charge, especially when it appeals to the musicians. I think they're some of the spreaders of culture. So you got to get them ready for this fight. They got to stir up the people. It reminds me of when we might have a natural disaster or a big societal event, and popular musicians and celebrities will put on benefit concerts and host events to encourage the public to get involved and pledge funds for help and that sort of thing. It could be an appeal of that kind, an appeal to the cultural centers. It could be a call, and it's telling them to call back to those other songs, right, that are already being sung, those other stories that have already been retold. It's almost, remember the other times the Lord delivered the people. Remember the songs that are sung. Remember all the times that Yahweh has saved us. He will do it again. The people will march for the Lord. Let's go. And so it could be that sort of a social stirring of the people as well. I think any of those can fit in this context. And I think they all kind of can work and flow. You get the sarcasm, you maybe get a little bit of shame, or it's the appeal to the influencers, to use a modern term.
Yeah, I guess that makes complete sense too, because, the whole point is you're wanting, this is after the fact though, right? So I guess the telling of this story is for future generations to line up behind the Lord, to not repeat the errors of the past. Of course, we know how that turned out, but the goal is to communicate that, look how God worked in these amazing and surprising ways in our history. He continuously keeps his promises despite what we do. And so in verse 11, just to repeat it, at the watering places, repeat these triumphs of the Lord. What I also love as we head into the break, and something for us to think about, is that the credit goes to God. It doesn't, we're going,
always.
Jael's going to get a shout out. The people who stood up for the Lord are going to get a shout out later in the song. Certainly Deborah acknowledges her own role, but it's all to the deference that behind everything, behind the victory, is Yahweh. And that's, of course, something for us to remember.
Yeah, and that's clear all the way through. It opens up that way, right? And we see his presence throughout all of this. It's always reminding the people who is really behind this victory.
Well, folks, we're going to take just a few minutes for a break, and so don't go anywhere. But when we come back, Pastor Jones and I are going to keep on going through Judges chapter 5. We're going to keep hearing the song of Deborah and Barak, and basically a retelling of Judges chapter 4 in this poetic form. Hopefully, you'll still be there when we come back. We'll see you on the other side.
These are the voices of young Lutherans in Mexico City, children who are excited to learn more about their Savior, Jesus. But they need our help because good Lutheran books for kids in the Spanish language are in short supply in Mexico. To learn how you can help tell Spanish-speaking kids everywhere about Jesus in a language they can understand, go to the Lutheran Heritage Foundation website at lhfmissions.org/Juan 316.
Welcome back to Thy Strong Word. I'm your host, Pastor Phil Booe. With me this morning is the Reverend Rick Jones, Chaplain and Vice President of Spiritual Life for the Dakota Boys and Girls Ranch in Minot, North Dakota. Friends, thank you for gathering around God's Word with us this morning. I'd love to hear from you, so feel free to email me at pastorboo@gmail.com, or you can connect with me on Facebook. You can ask me anything or just say hi. If you like Thy Strong Word, why not share it with others who might enjoy it too? The program airs on AM 850 in St. Louis, or you can stream it live or on demand at kfuo.org. You can also listen to it on the KFUO app or on your favorite podcasting service. I appreciate that you've chosen to grow in your faith with me and my guests every weekday, so thank you for being part of the show. Well, now, Pastor Jones, before the break, we were talking about just sort of setting the stage, what was going on, to whom this, song is being written, right? And the purpose for it, to go proclaim it everywhere. It's probably time for us to get into the actual text itself. So I'm going to start with just a beat before verse 12, pardon me. And I'm going to read, I'd say through verse 18. That should get us into it a little bit. So here we go.
Yeah.
Then down to the gates marched the people of Yahweh. Awake, awake, Deborah. Awake, awake, break out in song. Arise, Barak, lead away your captives, O son of Abinoam. Then down marched the remnant of the noble. The people of Yahweh marched down for me against the mighty. From Ephraim, their root, they marched down into the valley, following you, Benjamin, with your kinsmen. From Machir marched down the commanders, and from Zebulun those who bear the lieutenant's staff. The princes of Issachar came with Deborah, and Issachar, faithful to Barak. Into the valley they rushed at his heels. Among the clans of Reuben there were great searchings of heart. Why did you sit still among the sheepfolds to hear the whistling for the flocks? Among the clans of Reuben there were great searchings of heart. Gilead stayed beyond the Jordan, and Dan, why did he stay with the ships? Asher sat still at the coast of the sea, staying by his landings. Zebulun is a people who risk their lives to the death. Naphtali, too, on the heights of the field. So we're getting some shout outs now, both good and bad, calling out some of these different tribes, and some responded to the God's call, to Deborah's leadership, to Barak's leadership, and some, for their own various reasons, did not. Let's look at that.
Yeah, so those verses that you just read are kind of the roll call for action of the people in their parts in the coming fight. First, the leaders of Deborah and Barak, Deborah's going to get first billing as the prophetess and judge, and it's through her direction that Barak is called into service. And again, if we remember the previous chapter, he's not exactly an eager leader. So we get that whole situation with him and Deborah going into battle. After that, we get the various tribes listed, along with their willingness or unwillingness to help. Ephraim and Benjamin are in for the fight. They're ready to go. They're given a place of honor there. Machir is not one of the tribes that we are familiar with. And if we look at the history of the tribes, we learn that this is probably a generational reference for Manasseh. Machir is the eldest son of Manasseh. And so at this time, perhaps the tribe is known as the next generational leader. We don't know for sure, but likely it's understood that Machir is a reference to Manasseh. Issachar also joins the ranks. They're united under Barak, and so they're willing to fight. Zebulun and Naphtali are also valiant volunteers for the cause, and so they get special note at the end of the section as they're willing to literally put their lives on the line. So they're kind of given a special mention at the end there. When they talk about Reuben, it's interesting. Reuben appears to be very wishy-washy on the subject. They have to deliberate and think deeply on whether or not this is something they should be doing. And we aren't given any more context. Maybe they're dealing with their own struggles, but we don't know. Ultimately, they are not willing to join this fight with their kinsmen. We get this reference to Gilead, again, not one of the tribes, but likely a geographical reference to the tribe of Gad. So Gad, Dan, and Asher, they likewise do not enter the fight to stand beside their fellow Israelites. They stay in their respective territories, separated from their country. And Gad is across the Jordan, so maybe they're dealing with some things from the other side, but again, not mentioned. They stay in their area on the other side of the Jordan River there. And then Asher and Dan, it seems to report that they're too busy with their ports, their trade, their commerce in the Mediterranean and things to get involved in the battle for the Promised Land. Now, again, maybe there's other issues going on. Maybe they're dealing with more localized fighting with other groups. We don't know. All we're shown is from this song and from those that are celebrating God's victory, these are the ones that did or did not enter the battle. And if you did not enter, you're not looked on with favor. But then if you're counting, if you're doing the math, we're still missing two tribes. And so the absence of Judah and Simeon, we don't know why they're not mentioned. We can only speculate. Some have maybe thought maybe there's already some bad blood or some social distance between these tribes and the others. Or again, some people said, well, maybe they're busy fighting on the other front. We don't know. Regardless, we have our recruits, and the proper honor and proper shame has now been recorded throughout history for all generations to hear of what God does and how his people are either with the rest of Israel or they are not.
You know, and we often think about Israel, or I should say, when I'm reading the Old Testament, I get into the habit of thinking of Israel as this collective whole. You know, we talk about the 12 tribes of Israel as if they are this uniform unit, and it's like the United States of America you could talk about as a collective whole, but it doesn't mean everybody's getting along, and it doesn't mean that all the states are always unified. I think that's something that's sort of missed when we talk about them, when we think about them, and this really illustrates that not only does each tribe, because of their different geographical inheritances, like for instance, you mentioned Dan staying with the ships. There's some speculation that, because they hadn't even really taken their inheritance yet, they haven't even established themselves yet. So they don't have time to go, or they don't believe they have the ability to go fight in this other front. But anyway, we see that everybody has their own thing going on, and there's also a lot of intertribal conflict. And that's just something that is illustrated here, but we don't often talk about.
Yeah. No, you're very correct on that. We tend to lump it all together, and maybe that's our American, sort of mindset. We think of the tribes more as states, but Israel is, the country, and so we have that sense behind it, where we don't understand the mindset so much when it was still the colonies, right? The different colonies interact the same way that the states do today, or was it different because the identity of the nation wasn't the primary feature of our national heritage? I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's something for us to keep in mind. I'm going to read verses 19 through 23 because then we just get a little bit more. The kings came, they fought. They fought the kings of Canaan at Taanach by the waters of Megiddo. They got no spoils of silver. From heaven the stars fought. From their courses they fought against Sisera. The torrent Kishon swept them away. The ancient torrent, the torrent Kishon. March on, my soul, with might. Then loud beat the horse's hooves with the galloping of his steeds. Curse Meroz, says the angel of Yahweh. Curse its inhabitants thoroughly, because they did not come to help of Yahweh, to the help of Yahweh against the mighty. So the kings came, they fought. So the kings, who are they fought the kings of Canaan. That's plural. We're actually getting some details here, like this torrent of Kishon, things that weren't included in chapter 4. And so we have to kind of discern what these might be.
Yeah, so the kings, they came and fought. Again, probably just a reference to the various Canaanite entities that are seeking to overthrow the Israelites at this time. They appear to have thought that it was going to be an easy victory for them, but they are sadly mistaken, as when you take on the Israelites, you're taking on the people of God, and that means you're taking on God by extension. And so here we see a depiction of the elements themselves are going to start fighting. I suppose quickly mention that we understand that they thought it was going to be an easy victory. They were going to get the spoils. They were going to get all that gold and silver and the plunder. But here, nope, they didn't get anything. They got the opposite of what they were expecting. They were handedly defeated. And why? Because even the elements are going to fight against them. Because, again, they're not just fighting the people. They're fighting Yahweh. And he is the one that is the God of creation. And so creation.
Well, I was going to say that part really stands out to me. I didn't mean to interject, but like that 20 I want to focus on. From heaven, the stars fought, and from their courses, they fought against Sisera. And then, of course, you are going to bring up, I know, that the torrent Kishon in terms of elements, but just beginning with the stars, I mean, is this kind of a supernatural event in the skies, like the falling of meteorites or eclipses on the people, or is it more metaphorical or angelic? Again, I know you don't have any special insight, but what do you find that's really referring to?
Right. So, I mean, perhaps we've got some, meteors falling or something like that. But I think what's more likely is this is an allusion to an ancient Near East belief that rain came from the stars. And so the stars joining the fight here is an allusion to a downpour that happened. And then that fits nicely with what we see happening with the Kishon, with the river. If there's a sudden downpour that's causing problems for the Canaanites, the river is taking on all this extra water and there's flooding happening. It turns this river into a torrent, as the text says here, and it sweeps the enemies away, which with that, I can't help but hear an echo of Exodus, right? As God swept away Pharaoh's army with the Red Sea. Here we see the Kishon serving that purpose. God is getting nature itself, creation itself is joining the fight. The chariots are being bogged down in the mud and the mire as this downpour is happening. The river is overflowing and flooding and sweeping these Canaanites away. That is what you're fighting against. You're not just fighting against the people. You're fighting against the one who's caring for the people, and he is the God of creation.
Well, and they certainly could not do anything against, the God of creation. As you mentioned earlier, there really is no battle because the sin of the Israelites is not trusting in that God is with them. I mean, they're being led by this motherly figure, a general who doesn't want to go without her, the ultimate glory is kind of going to go, the final blow, quite literally, is going to go to a foreigner. But at the end of the day, they have the stars and in the heavens, and they have the seas on the shore. They have the waters and the creation. Everything is on their side because they are on God's side. So turning after these false gods really makes it look very foolish. You mentioned. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and in this section, it's very poetic too, and so highlighting that importance, that it's God using His full might here. This is where we get a lot of that alliteration. We get the rhyme scheme. We get the words, and even in the English, it starts to come out with the loud beat of the horse hoofs, the galloping of his steeds. The English isn't a perfect, translation of the Hebrew, but this is where a lot of those poetic elements are coming out. And we get even in the English, the Kishon, the torrent of the Kishon. It sounds almost onomatopoetic when we think about water. And so this is a highlight, even rhetorically, in the text to show that this is the key. It's not the people, it's not the Israelites that are bringing this victory. It is God that's bringing this victory. And even the construction of the text is showing us that.
Curse Meroz says, the angel of Yahweh. Curse its inhabitants thoroughly because they did not come to the help of Yahweh. God doesn't need help, right? But the angel of the Lord curses the city of Meroz or Meroz. That seems to be oddly specific.
Yeah, so apparently there was, whether these are a faction of specifically Israelites or it's those that are supposed to be allies of the Israelites, they did not join in defending God's people, and so they are given a curse as well, set apart even from those listed earlier in the roll call of Israel. But these are those that did not help, and so they are given a curse, the opposite of a blessing. They did not answer the Lord's call. They did not care for God's people, and so they are an enemy as well. And the angel of the Lord, often in the Old Testament, we assume this is the hand of God. This is the representative that is going to make God's will known. Some people have speculated that where we see the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament, we're actually talking about the pre-incarnate Son. So this is Jesus before he is born and named Jesus. I don't know that we want to speculate much more on that, but here clearly a presence of God's army through this angel of the Lord being shown to be present through this fight for God's people.
You mentioned earlier that the purpose of putting this to song was to proclaim it and be able to pass it down to children and be reminded of the great victory of God. And we do that too today with lots of our Sunday school hymns that are telling the stories of the Bible in these beautiful hymn forms. Well, verses 24 through 27, just listen, folks, and see if you can hear them on the lips of our children singing at the front of the church on Sunday. Here we go. Most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Canaanite, of tent-dwelling women most blessed. He asked for water, and she gave him milk, and she brought him curds in a noble's bowl. She sent her hand to the tent peg, and her right hand to the workman's mallet. She struck Sisera, she crushed his head, she shattered and pierced his temple. Between her feet he sank, he fell, he lay still. Between her feet he sank, he fell, and where he sank, there he fell, dead. And then everybody claps for the kids. So, but really, it's visceral. But war is visceral. What happened is real, and communicating the truth doesn't need to be sanitized because this is God's victory. But through this most blessed of women, Jael. Very, very interesting and graphic text here.
Yeah, so again, retelling the events of the previous chapter, which in its own right, just in the narrative and very graphic depiction of the final victory here. But here we almost dwell on it, right? The repetition of it. The mallets in hand, and we hear the word struck, the word crushed, the word shattered and pierced, sank, fell, he lay. Between her feet, sank, fell, he sank, he fell. That repetition over and over and over with this to really dwell on this moment, putting it into the people's heads. They can't help but think about what this is and how, as you said, visceral it is. Yeah, not exactly the one that we're going to have the children singing, but very much still showing that God will bring deliverance even in unexpected ways. He is a God of real people, and so we have real horrific events depicted here. And we're going to see the horrific side of war in the next couple verses too, but here how it's so described. And it's interesting, again, the glory was going to go to a woman, but it wasn't Deborah. It was Jael, a wife of a Canaanite, so an outsider. And it was interesting, the song, early on the song, it mentioned Shamgar, so not just a time stamp, but also showing culturally what's going on. Shamgar was an outsider as well, not an Israelite. And so Shamgar and Jael, two non-Israelites who bring deliverance to God's people. God will accomplish his purposes in ways we do not expect. If the people are not faithful, God will provide faithful ones to deliver the people. And we see that happening here through the hand of Jael. I suppose a housewife, but here a tent wife, one who's taking care of the camp, taking care of their homestead, which happens to be a tent. And so she does the best. She knows how to set up a tent, and she does that right through Sisera's head. Yes, graphic, stark, but incredible irony and incredible unexpectedness through how God is bringing victory this day.
And as graphic as that part of the song is, what I think is coming next is more deeply sad. Because now what we're going to hear is Deborah, who's singing the song, who's ostensibly written the song. She is going to now be looking at the whole situation through the eyes of Sisera's mother. We're going to read verses 28 through 30. Out of the window she peered. The mother of Sisera wailed through the lattice. Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why tarry the hoofbeats of his chariots? Her wisest princesses answer. Indeed, she answers herself. Have they not found and divided the spoil? A womb or two for every man, a spoil of dyed materials for Sisera, a spoil of dyed materials embroidered, 2 pieces of dyed work embroidered for the neck as a spoil. So she imagines Mama Sisera waiting for her son to come home. She introduces herself as a mother, and she ends this as a mother's point of view. I think it really is pointing to the senselessness of all the violence because, what is he going after? Spoil? And yet, now because of her son's, exploits, now a mother is without her son and she's just sitting there waiting for him to come home, and he's not coming home.
No, he won't come home. And it is. It's really interesting. We said, well, why would Deborah do this? Why would the prophetess who is telling forth the victory that God brought to his people, why is she putting us in such a disheartening situation now that we are looking through the eyes of Sisera's mother? And I think you might be onto it there with the senselessness. War is always terrible. Bloodshed is always awful. This is not how things should be. And so she's showing the reality of the horrors of war, the terrible truth that is going on. There's always 2 sides of this. Even if there might be a clear, villain and a clear hero, it's still an awful consequence for the people involved with this. And it's interesting, the handmaiden trying to comfort the mother. even using that as an opportunity to talk about some of the horrors that happen with war, with what happens with the plundering, and a womb or two for every man. That's terrible. It's an awful thing. It sounds, but we see Deborah not shying away from it. So we see the truth of what's happening, even though it's a hard truth to hear. And so we are left, yes, God brings victory to his people, but maybe it's a time not just for celebration, but reflection within that celebration. What is the cost of victory?
Well, and you say that Deborah doesn't shy away, and she doesn't, because while I do believe that this is a little bit of an introspection, seeing it from Sisera's mother, I think when it talks about the things like the womb or two for every man, it sort of wakes us up. It's like, Mama Sisera is upset, but they're not on the right side, because then the whole chapter ends with 31. So may all your enemies perish, O Yahweh, but your friends be like the sun as he rises in his might. And then we're told, and the land had rest for 40 years. So we have another period of rest. But it's just, I don't know what is more striking, the prose in chapter 4 or the poetry in chapter 5. But regardless, together, there's no wonder why the author of the book of Judges dedicated 2 chapters to relating the story. Yeah.
Well, and getting 2 different sort of perspectives on it that way. If you kind of gloss over the gore and the visceral nature of everything involved with this war and this campaign in chapter 4, you're kind of stopped in your tracks in chapter 5 to be forced to reflect on all of it. But it's interesting. She goes from, we were given an incredible victory by Yahweh fighting even with the elements, to Sisera's mother reflecting on, well, where is he? And she's not going to see her son return. But then the handmaiden say, but what was the reality? Israel, yes, we were given a victory. It was at a great cost to other people, but they would have done the same thing to us. And this is what they would have been after. So let us remember, we do not want to be the enemy of the Lord. Instead, we put our trust and our hope in him, as he is the one who will rise to the occasion to save his people. He intervenes on our behalf, and it is in him who we put our trust. He gets the glory at the beginning of this song, throughout the middle of the song, and it ends with it declaring his praise. And so that's where we are left to realize who gives this generation of rest. It's the efforts of Yahweh. Yes, there are people involved, but at the direction and at the will of what the Lord is doing.
Well, and that's where we'll leave it today. I'd like to thank my guest this morning, the Reverend Rick Jones, chaplain and vice president of spiritual life for the Dakota Boys and Girls Ranch in Minot, North Dakota. Thanks, Pastor, for being on the show again.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Pastor Booe.
And folks, as I mentioned at the top of the show, this week is Holy Week. On Good Friday, we have a special free text First Friday episode of Thy Strong Word. It features myself and 2 guests, the Reverends Chris Amon and Jesse Baker. We'll be discussing Jesus' final words from the cross. So tune into it and listen live or catch it on demand this Friday. Tomorrow, however, we move right into Judges chapter 6. So be there and hear how they did evil in the sight of the Lord again. Until then, may God's peace and blessings be with you all. Father, keep us in thy strong word.